Okay, bonjour. Welcome to the Light Rail Subcommittee. Avant de commencer, il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire.
Before we start, I just want to say that Ottawa finds itself on the territory of Anishinaabe, Algonquin nations, whose presence has been here since time immemorial and continues to enrich us.
And I'll ask the clerk to call the roll. Thanks.
Councillor Tierney, Councillor Gower,
Here.
Councillor Leeper,
Here.
Councillor Kavanaugh, Vice Chair Curry,
Here.
Chair Desroches.
Here.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you very much. So as you can see, we have a very, we have the bare minimum from a quorum. So it asks, we'll have to be diligent to hold the line and maintain that quorum. And I'm certainly open to taking a break at some juncture. If people are so inclined, just let me know. Let's see if we can get through the bulk of the presentations and questions and comments and what have you. But if we do need to take a break, we certainly can. So any declarations of interest? None. Confirmations of minutes from the 28th of April, 2023. Is that confirmed? Confirmed. Thank you. Transit Service Department, item 4, Trillium Stage 2 independent peer review. We're going to have a presentation. I look forward to this. This is an important initiative to provide some additional oversight and advice to this committee and to City Council. And I think it was one of the most important decisions and most helpful decisions of the previous council. So look forward to hearing that today. And I think we'll help provide assurances to the public that we are again on track to deliver product that we can be proud of as a city. So with that, Madame and Michael, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour à tout le monde. Comme d'habitude, ça me fait plaisir d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. I'm pleased to be here today at today's Light Rail. We will provide you with information on the status of the construction of the O-Train South extension, the activities and regulatory approvals required to open the system, and the results of the independent review of the operating plans. There is an intricate coordination between the building of the new rail infrastructure and the preparations at OC Transpo to operate the system. My team has many interrelated projects on the way that allow us to be confident we will be ready to welcome customers to a safe and reliable Line 2 and 4. Over the course of the next few meetings, we will provide you with more information on the scope of these projects. Today, Michael Morgan, the director of all our rail construction program, will provide a construction update on the Stage 2 LRT project. Our presentation today provides an overview of the tremendous work that is being done. At our meeting in June, you will hear more detail and more news from our team members who will update you on the progress we continue to make. These team members will help you to see and understand the work being done, and you will be encouraged to ask pointed, specific questions directly of our experts. We believe that transparency and information is at the heart of building trust and the public trust in the work that we do. Great progress is being made across the South Line, and we are working to be ready for a fall opening. Following the construction update, we will provide information on testing and commissioning, the regulatory approval process, plans for trial running, and an overview of the public opening of the site extension. Today, you will see a draft of our daily trial running reports, which will be made available to committee members. It will be concise, direct, and will allow you to make important go, no-go decisions that will determine our next steps on an ongoing basis. At the end of our trial running, we will provide a detailed report which will help everyone fully understand the behind-the-scenes testing and work that demonstrates our success. Pat Scrimger, our Director of Transit Customer Service and Planning, will then share our plans for bus service once the system opens. As we get closer to opening, there will be many milestones to celebrate, and we look forward to sharing those with you. To start, let's share the findings of the independent peer review of the O-Trend South extension. This third-party review helps us to identify potential issues that could arise when operating service begins. By identifying these risks now, we are planning mitigations in advance to reduce the possibility they will occur. We are committed to delivering a safe, efficient, and reliable rail system that meets the needs of our city. I will now pass things over to Michael Morgan. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Le janvier 2022, le conseil municipal donne le
Thank
mandat.
you. In January, we started an exam to look at all of the different aspects of the project, of this, the objectives of this examination are around two poles: validate the strategies and the methods that are used, and to determine any potential problems that might happen.
The peer review that was initiated over a year ago through a motion from Councillor Meehan. In the gallery with me today are the people who stick handled this project for me, Justin Karofsky and Mina Rasa sitting at the back. So I asked them to join me because this includes a lot of technical details, but it also included a lot of legwork and hard work to get the answers and get the feedback. And in a moment, I'll give Sistra and RETP Dev a chance to introduce themselves when we get to that slide, but they are on the line and they are available to answer questions about the process if you have any. So with that, we'll move to the first slide. Just to give a little bit of background about the timing and the discussion. So back to 2021, there was an early discussion about bringing a motion forward to deal with this issue and provide an independent review. So we established those initial objectives for the peer review, went through procurement, and the winner of the procurement was awarded to a consortium of Sistra and RETP Dev. The cost of the peer review is roughly $663,000. So we received the final report in February, and we've since been working on our response and on our action plan to incorporate the recommendations into the activity that we're doing. So just a little bit about Sistra RETP Dev on the next slide. So the history of Sistra, over 60 years of experience in the industry. We do see them as a big player in the North American market. We've seen them on a number of big projects in Ontario, so certainly a lot of involvement there. RETP Dev, a big operator and maintainer of light rail systems around the world, so definitely bringing a solid background of operations and main experience to the table. So maybe just I'll ask the clerk to allow the Sistra RETP Dev people just to come online for a second, just to do a quick introduction.
Hello, so my name is Sam Habukresha. I am based here with Sistra Canada in Montreal, and I work as the Rail Systems Director, and I led the systems part review for the peer review for the Trillium Line.
Hello, my name is Laurent Jean. I work for Sistra Canada since 3 years now. I'm a maintenance engineer. I was involved in this project, and I represent operation and maintenance today for Sistra Canada.
Very good. So welcome to them both. They'll be on the call and listening in, and they'll be available for questions at the end of the call. So we go to the next slide. Just talk a little bit about process. So there was a lot of tabletop documentation reviews. We sent them documents, design documents, review documents, commissioning plans. They also came to Ottawa to do a series of site interviews. So they interviewed Transit Next staff directly. They interviewed city staff directly to understand the inputs to the project. They also did a number of site visits to go and see what was being built and how it was being built. That culminated into a series of discussions and back and forths where they would ask for additional information. They would ask for clarification. And so we would exchange documents in order to fulfill basically their requests and give them a fulsome picture of the project to understand how it was being put together. That resulted in a final review and a set of 47 recommendations that they provided to the city in respect to the Transnext and the Trillium Line Extension project. So we go to the next slide. We just talk about these 47 action items and how they're grouped. So there are 9 that deal with operations and maintenance, 3 in project management, 5 related to rail infrastructure, 20 related to rail systems, and 10 related to safety processes. And so I'll give you a bit of flavor for each of those today. I won't go into great detail on the individual recommendations because that is in the report, but I will give you a sense of where we're at and the progress that we've made in terms of actioning them. So in terms of the next slide, it just gives you a good sense of, there are 47 recommendations, which ones were, are fully complied with, which ones we complied with the intent. And we had, in some cases where we complied with the intent, we had our independent safety auditor just do a quick double check to make sure staff weren't missing something and we're taking appropriate steps. There was a number that are in progress. So there's some that are related to testing, and the testing is kind of upcoming. And so we haven't done the tests yet, but they will be completed. And there's 4 that are just for consideration for the future. And so we'll talk about all of those very briefly as we go through the presentation. So in terms of the project management, there are 3 recommendations. We go to the next slide. There was talk about a new baseline schedule. So at one point in the project, there was a couple of things happening where there wasn't clarity on the path forward, and in part because we weren't clear on the training requirements, how those were going to be included into the project schedule. So there was a lot of work through last fall to come up with a consolidated schedule that everyone agreed to, city staff, training department, all the internal departments, as well as Transnext. So that required a lot of coordination, but we did get there, and that was one of the recommendations. The other recommendation was really to have a lessons learned document to support the design and to support the project going forward. And so we had a number of lessons learned that were done, that were input into this project, and we'll have additional lessons learned that come out of it. So we go to the next slide, talk a little bit about the rail infrastructure. So there are some very detailed technical questions in the report, and very kind of detailed responses as well. But a few of them are in process. The direct fixation track methodology and test, the line break crossover rail, some post-concrete testing. So those are all good. We've met with those. We met with the intent, or we completed the actual activity by providing the documentation. There's a couple more to come. One is the tunnel ventilation documentation. So there's a final scrub before we put the system into service to make sure that all the design documentation, all the maintenance documentation, all the testing is all it all lines up and there's no discrepancies in any of the materials that are being provided. And then there's an additional test related to temperature in the tunnel with a train in the tunnel. So there's an initial test we'll do later in the summer, but we should be able to close that one off. So we're not concerned about those. You go to the next slide. So there were a series of rail systems or integration activities where there was additional focus and questions raised. One was on the door operator. The door operator, how does it work? Will it withstand freezing rain conditions? And so there are a series of tests that Stadler's done with those vehicles in other sites to prove that the vehicles can open under freezing rain conditions. And so we're comfortable that the type test that they did on other projects will be repeated here. In terms of the cold weather test, so this was a new one that hadn't been considered, where essentially you turn the vehicle off, allow the batteries to get down to a low temperature and make sure that the vehicle can start up in the morning. And so we did have a cold snap earlier in the year where we're able to take advantage of that weather and actually do the test with the vehicle, and it passed. And so that one will be closed off. Interior exterior noise tests. And so that one we're saving until we have the full alignment. So what we would do is we run the train up and down the alignment, basically measure the noise levels on the interior of the vehicle, make sure that they're compliant with what we're expecting. Essentially, this is a test on the interior of the vehicle, it's a test for passenger comfort. On the exterior of the vehicle, it's a test for essentially nuisance or noise to the community. So we'll be doing both of those tests in the future once we have access to the full alignment. Bogie rotational resistive test, vehicle vertical gaps. So a couple other ones that we're good with. One more that we do need to do, which is the GEBR, or Guaranteed Emergency Brake Rate Test. And so this is a test where you're basically forcing an emergency brake on the train on the tracks to ensure that you meet the minimum stopping distances. And so this is really you're putting the vehicle through its paces. Again, we want access to the complete system to do this type of test. few of the other tests deal with, or a few of the other items deal with documentation or testing plans, and those have either been provided or have been, the intent has been met. The next page for rail systems. So there were some questions in relation to future electrification. So the contract does have a requirement that the contractor, through their design, essentially makes space and ensures there's space for catenary pole foundations and other elements. So that preparation has been done. You know, they had some additional questions about that, but we're comfortable with the design in respect of future electrification. We know that as part of other discussions we've had with vehicle suppliers that the future designs might not require overhead catenary systems, that we might be able to go to a battery solution. And so that would be a very positive step forward in terms of being able to get to an electric vehicle sooner rather than having to come back and add OCS wires, overhead catenary system wires, at a later date. So it would certainly be a lot less work to go with a battery vehicle than to install that catenary system. And then there's 4 other plans and updates here of things that all the intent has been met. And so we're satisfied that we're with the results of that. In terms of the go forward, so there are, on the next slide, there's a couple things. You know, one to flag is the 2048 ridership forecast. And so right now, you know, we're meeting the forecast for ridership based on 12-minute headways. If we wanted to increase and get if we needed additional capacity on the system, we'd have to reduce the headways. You could probably reduce it to 10 minutes with some not cheap, but still relative to the current project, some modifications to the passing sidings at Walkley Station would be probably the biggest change. So as we think about the Trillium line going forward, you know, we need to think about how do we incrementally add double tracking along the alignment. You know, the crux of the problem is really in the north. When you go from Greenboro to Bayview, that's where we got the rock cut and the road structures and the bridges. That's where the work is required in order to essentially add more double tracking and reduce the headways. That's how we would get additional capacity in the future. They had some questions about minimum achievable headway and South Keys turnaround time. Some of those things are things that we will demonstrate and validate during the testing program. So once we have the complete system and we can demonstrate the 12-minute headway, that's where we'll start to play with the trains in and out of South Keys going to the airport and along the main line, making sure the passing meets are correct, making sure that the staffing levels are going to be suitable for the turnaround times at the end of the line. So turnaround times at Bayview, at Limebank, at South Keys, and at the airport. There's mention of an 8th Stadler train in the report in respect of adding more spares to the fleet. At this point, financially, it's not possible to purchase another vehicle, but it would be a scenario to consider in the future once technology is advanced with battery vehicles, if we wanted to explore additional vehicle, to look at that in the future through the purchase of a battery vehicle. We'll have more information about the network and how to run the network once we open the system to get a sense of energy consumption, turnaround times, capacity, and different things. And so that we'll be able to use that information to inform what a future electric solution would look like. There's a couple other things here that are still to come, additional incident simulations. And so this is really just testing the system. So if a train gets stuck at South Keys, if a train gets stuck at Bayview, what are we doing? Are our staff practicing those scenarios to understand, okay, how do we react? How do we respond? What does that look like in terms of the operation of the system? The same thing on the maintenance software, still looking, there's some additional work to be done there before we go into service. And then we're satisfied with the maintenance schedule and the obsolescence management plan that Transit Next has in place. So in the last one, we just talked about safety processes a little bit. And so this is in the current contract, we applied the CENELEC or EN standards to provide a more rigorous approach to safety management. One of the recommendations out of the public inquiry was to spend more time on this, to do it at the outset. And so it's been included in the contract since the start. We've also had our independent safety auditor involved since the start. So both of those things help. And so Sister RTP Dev took a very detailed look at the various documents and plans that come out of those standards and how they're being applied. To date, you know, there's 5 there that we've met the intent, and then there's another 5 where we believe we met the intent. And we asked our independent safety auditor center to have a look just to make sure we weren't missing something, to make sure that practically speaking, that the intent could be met with an alternative approach. So with that, that's a quick run through of the 47 recommendations, and happy to take any questions you might have about those.
Thank you. Questions from committee members? Councillor Leeper.
Thank you. I may need to go back on, but I'll get through a first batch to begin with. The first question, I'm wondering if the representatives from Sistra, who I believe are online, could we just hear from you the degree to which you agree that the staff report that's been sent to council is a fair representation of the current situation, a fair characterization of your recommendations?
You mean the presentation that was just done right now?
The oral presentation, but we were also given a written staff report that characterized what the recommendations were and what the staff response was. I'm hoping you've had a chance to read that and can characterize it as an accurate summary of this process.
I believe we did not get this report that you are referring to. However, the presentation that was done reflects what we have said in our what we have written in our report.
Okay, thank you. My next question is with respect, and I'm sorry, I don't have page numbers here, so I'll just use the recommendation numbers, but there's TRA.1. And I just want to make sure that I've understood this one. And most of these questions are really just clarification for my sake to make sure I've understood the report. The recommendation was that we recommend that the city and Transit Next quickly reach an agreement on the training schedule and content to avoid delay on the revenue service date. The response says the city and Transit Next continue to work collaboratively on the Trillium Line training program. It sounds to me then that that is not complete at this point. That training program is not finalized.
So it has taken us some time, but over the last year, we spent a lot of time discussing how we were going to roll out the training program, in part because you need a certain amount of infrastructure to be able to do the training.
Okay.
And I would say the schedule did go sideways a little bit at some point. And so we had to kind of rethink how we were going to do that and rethink the approach. So one of the things that we had originally envisioned was that we would have the complete system for kind of a block of time. Since that time, we've done more of a progressive approach, but all the way through ensuring that we're satisfied that the maturity of the system is such that the training's meaningful. And it took us a while to kind of get to a point where we had agreed to how much infrastructure is needed to start the training and what the maturity level is. But we're at that point now where we've got a plan that takes us through to the end of September.
So what is the target date to have that? I may be asking an irrelevant question, but is there a date by which you expect to have the training and schedule and content finalized?
So the content and the schedule is finalized now.
Okay, thank you. There's a recommendation, and I'm going to ask a non-engineer question around engineering. CON.01, I think that's concrete 01.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I will admit to being a little bit alarmed as a lay person in this, and I'm hoping you can reassure me. Transit Next should develop a method to verify after pouring the adequate positioning and concrete coverage of the structure reinforcement steel. I guess there is supposed to be on top of any steel about 4 centimeters of concrete.
I mean, depending on the design, depending on the element, the structural element, there are different requirements for how much cover you need over rebar for different structures. And so the question is really about validating that there's not too much cover, there's not too little, that there's the right amount of concrete cover over the rebar generally.
So that test as characterized in the staff response here speaks to a visual inspection.
Right.
So I assume that if you see steel, there's not 4 centimeters of steel on top.
Fair, yeah.
That strikes me as problematic. I mean, 4 centimeters is a fair bit. Within that 4 centimeters, if the steel is coming within a centimeter of the surface, it's not properly positioned. But how do you determine that from just a visual inspection?
Right. So I'll admit that I'm an electrical engineer by training, but typically it's through the forms are set up to allow You essentially the rebar set to a level within the form. You see the form comes up to a certain level, so you can see the distance between the rebar and the top of the form. So as long as the concrete gets to the top of the form, then you know you've got your clearance.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate that. Have they had to rectify any pores to date?
There's been one plinth where they did go back and do some rectification because they saw some results they didn't like, but generally, I think the pores have gone very well.
Okay, thank you. In SEM .06, the basis of design corrosion control document should be updated to take into account the measure concerning corrosion control on the bridge, including the track design. The
Right.
response speaks to stray current.
Right.
I couldn't understand the connection between those. Could I just get that explained in layer terms?
Yes. Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, so on an electric system, like the Confederation line, the return path for the current is through the running rails. So
Okay.
through the running rails back to the substation. If there are any kind of discontinuities or issues or nearby metal, that metal can actually pick up an induced current, a stray current. So the current can leak out of the rail, leak through other nearby metallic objects like gas pipelines, like, you know, anything metal, telecom lines, and essentially can corrode that metal. So the adjacent metal can be corroded as a result of the stray current on an electric system. But because this is a diesel powered system, we're not as worried about the stray current issue.
Okay. Thank you. The auditors, for lack of a better term, stated that you should use a turnaround time of at least 5 minutes at South Keys for the trains at the airport link. The answer seems to say, we don't agree. We think 3 is a fine target, and we're going to test to make sure that we can get 3.
Correct.
Is that correctly characterized?
Yes.
Okay. What happens if you can't reach 3?
So when in any situation where you're turning a train around and you can't meet the turnaround time, then you need to do a step back operation with the operators, which requires additional staff. So as the train pulls in, you know, there's somebody in the leading cab who's driving it away. Somebody gets on the train, gets in the cab on the other direction, so that the minute the train stops and is ready to turn around, the other driver just starts going immediately. You don't need to account for the time for the operator to go from one cab, walk through the train, get to the other cab, start up the cab and keep going. The operator's already there because they got on at the last station.
So are you asserting that that's something the authors of the peer review didn't take into consideration when they made that 5-minute recommendation?
No, I think that they're just recommending that good practice is to have 5 minutes for an operator on a system. In our view, we think the 3 minutes is sufficient for the 40-meter vehicle, but obviously we need to test that.
Okay. I know my colleagues have got questions as well. I have actually just one more question. There's MAI 05 with respect to a recommendation that Transit Next work with the city work with stakeholders around a backup solution for the maintenance software. And the response is you're making sure that the software works.
Correct.
Is that so? You don't propose to develop a backup to that software in line with the recommendation?
I mean, the backup would be to essentially have a manual system, which is not ideal. And so we're keeping the pressure on having the fully automated system working and ready to go.
Would you indulge me just in asking sorry, may I just ask the consultants who have probably been listening in, there are 2 answers here that we've received from staff, and I just want to get your characterization of it. The first is that the turnaround time is fine at 3 minutes. You had recommended they should look at 5. And then the second is that a backup solution to the management software be developed, and staff have said, we'll make sure the software works. Are you satisfied with those answers? Would you still assert, after hearing those answers, that your recommendations are correct and should be followed?
For the first one, I don't have, your first question, I'm sorry, but I can't answer because I'm not sure, but if 3 is enough, but I can, maybe Sami, if you had the answer, but I don't get it, so I can't, I will not give you a wrong one, so I will not give you my this answer, but for the second one, I recommend to have a backup solution. If software, it could be not by computer, it could be with by paper or with a process. This solution don't have to be software or by computer. You can have just a process to mitigate if the CMMS system doesn't work.
Okay, so you're satisfied then with the answer that you've heard from Mr. Morgan?
Mr. Morgan says they will. Sorry, I lost my word in English. I'm in Quebec, so I speak a lot of in French, not in English. But
no, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think he suggested that the backup could be a manual process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. That's reassuring. What I may do is ask staff to forward an email to you with respect to the turnaround times.
Yeah, okay. It's not. Yeah, and we will answer. It's not a problem.
Okay. Fair. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thanks, Councillor Curry. Oh, was he ahead? I'm sure you're the vice chair though, so.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to get this report. I have two questions really. The very first recommendation about drawing a line in the sand, I guess I want to hear from the representative from Sistra and from staff as to what that really means. So drawing a line in the sand to me means let's look at litigation in future when you draw lines in sand. So I just wonder the thinking behind that and then how that is now being interpreted, what that line in the sand means.
Okay, so when we first started to look at the documentation and started meeting with TNext, what we found out is that there was no up-to-date planning or time schedule for many of the activities. So we thought at the time that, and we still think that it's not a healthy situation, let's say, and our understanding is that it was not possible for commercial reasons, let's say, between TNext and the city to establish an up-to-date time schedule for all the remaining activities. So what we suggested is that we said you cannot continue working without an up-to-date schedule. So you need to what we use this expression in the report, draw a line in the sand and have a baseline and start working based on this new baseline, and then look at the other, let's say, commercial issues separately later on. But I mean, the recommendation really comes from the fact that we thought it is not possible to continue working without an up-to-date schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate that. It's just that I also understand that there is a schedule and then things change, life happens, and then sometimes things need to be adjusted. So I guess, and thank you for that. I understand that. Good to know. And then staff, when you read that, how do you think that's going to work?
If I look at the program where we were a year and a half ago, I would say that we were not in alignment with Transit Next on the schedule, and that was affected by commercial discussions in regard to when the completion date was going to be. Since that time, we've made progress working with them in terms of agreeing to the schedule. And so we've set aside that commercial argument and have agreed to a schedule that we believe will lead to completion. So a year and a half ago, I would say we were not in a healthy position with the contractor and the schedule, but today we're in a much better place. It took some time, certainly. Getting agreement on the training schedule was a big part of that. Getting agreement on some other matters was a part of that, but we did work with them and we're at a place now where we're satisfied with the schedule.
Great, thanks. I think to the Horgan report about relationships and, that is, I think, fundamental to this. So, okay. I also just want to ask more broadly, like when I was just sort of listening from the top of my head of the different reviews we've had, we've had the Horgan report, obviously. We had the report a few weeks ago. I don't know if it was at Transit or it was here actually, about another review that was done, an audit. And then we have this independent review. You have your lessons learned document. I'm wondering if anybody has put together something where you can look at all of them and is there overlap? Were they all necessary? I understand that the community wants us to absolutely be looking into this as much as we can to make sure things are working properly, right? But there's also this, overkill component of how many times can we look at the same thing? How many more experts can we have come in and look at the same thing, right? And not to diminish any of them, but if there has been significant overlap, I think that would be a lesson for council as to what we want to see going forward. What is the best one to do? How many should we do? What categories should we do if we're doing reviews, if it's, anything is necessary going forward? But is there a document that actually shows them all and the overlap or anything like that?
A few times in a few places, we've tried to consolidate kind of what, provide a summary of all the different reviews that have taken place. I would say that this one, this particular review, one of the differences, it's the first time that we've had anybody provide an independent review of the application of the Senelec and the EN standards. And so that was kind of a big change that came out of stage 1 into stage 2 was the application of this new standard. This is the first time that we've applied the standard in a project and that we've had someone take an independent look at it in a very detailed way. Like the things that they're looking at as part of this review were very precise, very much into the details. So it's the first time we've done that. But as we go through all of these, like we had lessons learned about from the 2001 to 2018, 19 service. So we understood kind of the weak points on the trillium line that was fed into the procurement process. There is a bit of continuous improvement that we like to apply to it. This is a very structured approach to that, which I think is good. And I think because we have never had someone look at that Senelec standard previously, because it's the first time we applied it, it makes sense to have done this. Going forward, we want to kind of use the outcome from this to say, for Confed East, for Confed West, what are the gaps? What are the pieces that, to your point, let's not like look at something 15 times, but what are the areas that haven't been looked at to kind of see where is there, do a bit of a gap analysis to see, well, maybe we haven't looked at this area, maybe we need to look at that area going forward. So, I mean, the point is well taken. We need a little bit more work on that front.
Chair, if I may, peut-être juste compléter aussi en disant que c'est un bon exemple.
I could add that it's a good example. We use the public review to learn a lot in the actions that were presented last month here. We reviewed all the lessons learned and applied them to stage 2. So for us, they're already integrated in our way of working. It's our new way of working now. It's not only a report that saying something and that will be shelved. We adapt our methods of work, our approach, how we look at things, how we deal on a daily basis with things. So I just wanted to add this. And if you don't mind, give the word to Sistra. They can speak French just like I'm doing now, because we could have more natural and direct answers to your questions. Yes, thank you for that. If you want to speak French, please go ahead.
Very much for that answer. That's very helpful. Going forward, I mean, I think it would be helpful for council to hear. Which ones do you find the most helpful? What would you recommend be done as reviews? Because council members can come up with recommendations and say, well, we think this is a good idea. Obviously, Councillor Meehan came up with a very good idea here, and it resulted in positive things. So it would be helpful for us. So we don't want to send you off on wild goose chases, but we want to get at what we really need to get at. Anyway, thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Thanks for your patience, Councillor Gower.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the presentation. Looking through the document from the peer reviewers, it's page 5, I think, that lists 11 areas of risk. And I understand that the 47 action items are meant to address these areas of risk. So if I could ask staff, with the action items that have been fully implemented and that are in progress, what are the remaining areas of significant risk that committee and council should be aware of?
Mr. Chair, the next presentation does provide kind of an overview of the risks on the project, and so we will spend a little bit of time on that. But one of the things that you see, and I would say kind of broadly, the theme that you could pull out of this is that there's still testing to be done. There's still performance testing to be done. We still need to run the trains and demonstrate that those turnaround times, that the 12-minute headways and all of those things will work correctly. So that's still outstanding. So that's work that's not been completed. If during the course of that testing, we find new things that need to be rectified, then that will take time. So that's one of the key risks for us, is anything new that comes out of the planned testing over the coming months.
Okay. The first item on the risk, it notes the ongoing claim between TNEX and the city should be resolved quickly. Due to the claim, transparent communication between both parties is reduced, which leads to possibly a lack of trust and potentially an incorrect vision of the actual project progress by the city. How is this being addressed?
Yeah.
Chair, nous avons déjà débuté des discussions.
We've started our discussions without prejudice with TNEX. Our objective is to settle any potential problem so that we have a good relationship. Eventually, we'll have the opportunity to come before your committee or council to give you more information. For now, we are going through informal discussions to make sure that this situation is being addressed.
Is there a lack of trust or a lack of sharing of information? Is that happening in actuality now, or is there a good level of collaboration and communication between the two parties?
Actually, we have a very good collaboration, and now we have a good relation. But for sure, we will need to maintain that, and we'll continue to move forward.
Okay. One of the in the risk and throughout the document, integration of systems comes up. They mention specifically the head end as a risk. Can you explain what the head end is and where that concern lay and how that's being addressed as we head into the testing phase?
So in this project, the city, so I have a team that's actually providing all the servers and the equipment that goes into the control center. So all the equipment, so the control systems, the camera systems, all the head end service systems that go into the control center are being delivered by city staff, as opposed to the field equipment, which is being delivered by Transit Next staff. So when we refer to the head end, there's a risk that the equipment that the city staff are putting into the control center won't be correctly integrated with all the field equipment being put in place by Transit Next at the stations. I would say in a perfect world, what you do is you get all of that equipment into a warehouse facility, you install it all, you power it up, you configure it, you demonstrate all of it works one time in a warehouse, in a factory, and then you deploy it to the field. What we've done on this project is the city set up a test lab at one of our facilities where we've set up all the head end equipment with all field devices to test it in that test lab. Transit Next, for their part, has set up a test lab in the field, and we've connected those two test labs to be able to pre-configure all the devices, demonstrate, do as many systems integration tests on the equipment in a weather controlled, safe environment, indoors, work out as many bugs as possible. Once that pre-configured equipment is tested and verified, then it can be deployed to the station. Once it's in the station, it should be easier just to turn it on and it will work. There's no like climbing up a ladder to check that the camera's IP connection is correctly configured, that the wiring's done correctly. Everything should be pre-tested before it goes into the field. We've done that as much as possible using this test lab to kind of simulate a factory environment between the head end, the control equipment that we're providing, city staff's providing, with the field equipment that Transit Next is providing.
Okay, and then this is again one of the elements that as more installation happens and as testing continues, this is where it really goes through the paces and you start to understand where there could be issues and so on.
Correct. You want to try to do as much of that testing before the equipment gets into the field. Once it's in the field, then it becomes, there's additional layers of difficulty to troubleshoot and test and configure. There's literally travel time to get to the different places. If to the extent that you can pre-configure and pre-test everything in a lab environment and then put it in the field, that will eliminate some of the system integration risks.
Okay. There's also a recommendation that a further independent review be performed at a point in time closer to revenue service. Have we determined when and how that review will happen?
At this point, we've not decided to do an additional review, only in part because now that the equipment's being installed, the actual problems will, if there are any, will surface very quickly. We'll know what right away if we can't make a connection between the control center to the cameras at the station. So it will be self-evident if there's problems, and we'll flush that out through the testing program. We do have the system integration verifier who's doing some additional checking. That will be some form of independence. And we've got the safety auditor who'll be checking on the safety functions, and then the independent certifier checking on just the completion. So there are some independent parties, but at this point, there's not a thought to bring in another group to have another look.
Okay. I guess maybe building on Councillor Curry's question, this is, I think, a useful report, and I think the recommendations, it sounds like staff have found those helpful. Is it common that peer reviews would be done like this for systems at this stage? It is. I see Renee's head nodding. I'm just curious about best practices.
Yes, absolutely. My experience is exactly there. And for the REM in Montreal, Sistra has done the same peer review.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gower. Any other questions? I don't think we have any councillors on the line. Any other questions for staff? Councillor Leeper? No? Okay, thank you very much. Just a question for me. Obviously, we're on our way with a lot of the recommendations, and some of them are very much in progress. And Councillor Leeper raised the one with respect to training, that it's essentially in progress, and that we're working towards resolution of that, so that we're in line for readiness, and we're following through on the recommendation. Can you, in future meetings, as we get closer to the go live point, provide an update to this committee on the follow-up to these recommendations that are ongoing? Can you do that? Okay. Renee a dit oui. Okay, great. Because I look at the report.
Yeah, Renee said yes.
It's solid that we receive this, but for me, it's not just receive it today. I think it's receive it today, but continue to monitor and continue to ensure that we're following up on these recommendations. So I'm going to just ask that we add a recommendation that the LRT subcommittee be informed in follow-up. Sorry, that the LRT subcommittee be informed of follow-up progress on this report in future LRT updates that we'll receive. So there'll be two recommendations: that the LRT subcommittee receive this report for information, and that the LRT subcommittee be informed of the follow-up work on the progress of the recommendations in future LRT updates. Something to that effect. Okay, is that carried? Okay, great. Thank you again. Thank you to staff, and thank you to the contractors who provided this oversight and provided us again with a different dimensional view on the project, and look forward to again hearing future additional follow-up on this at future meetings. Next item is an update on the Trillium Line update, item 4.2, Trillium Line extension project. So again, turn it over to staff to provide us with that information. Thank you.
Merci. Okay, here we go. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I give the floor to Michael and Pat, I would like to say that the work that will be presented to you today, and I said it in my introduction, consider this as an overview. We're setting the table, and eventually, and in June, actually, many people from my team will be coming here. You're seeing a few people, but you should know that there's a large team behind this project that is quite aware of the project, and in June, we will introduce you to this team, and you'll see how the choreography is working. What is important when we install the communication system? How do we communicate with the control room? Everything must be done so that on the D-Day, when everything will be very transparent, but all the work behind will have been done perfectly. So that's why I want you to consider the presentation today as an overview. We're just setting the table, and then we'll start to do the settings properly on the table.
Thank you very much. And again, I've asked my construction manager for stage 2, Jocelyn Degg, and Theo Teddy, who's the program manager of construction. They've joined us in the gallery just to be a part. We're hoping that they will present at a future LRT subcommittee on the construction progress that's been made. So on that, if we put up the presentation, we'll go, there are a number of pictures of each of the stations, and so we'll go at pace through each of these. So if you just go to the next slide, it's just a placeholder of the agenda, just a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I am going to give an update on construction on the Trillium line, talk about testing and commissioning some of the other preparations, and then I'll pass it to Pat Scrimger, who will give you an update on the bus plans and the replacement service. So if you go to the next slide. So talking about the O Train South, the next slide talks about just line 2 and line 4, the new nomenclature that we're using for the lines. We'll start at the next slide has a photo of Bayview Station. So Bayview Station, so this is the new head house. And so as we go through construction, I am going to point out some things that we are speaking to the contractor about deferring. That is to say, we want them to prioritize their staff and construction activities on things that we need. And one of the first things that we've kind of discussed with them is the idea of deferring the completion of the Bayview pedestrian bridge. I'd rather have them focus on other stations that we're actually going to be using. And that head bridge, as you can see in the photo, it doesn't go to a development just yet. And so we've essentially agreed with them that to put that on the back burner and come back and finish that later. And so that would include the elevators, the pedestrian bridge, that structure that you see on the right. In the middle of the picture, there is going to be a fare gate bank, and an additional entrance for people coming from that direction. And so that will be opened. But the rest of the pedestrian bridge is not required for service this year. And so we basically told the contractor they can prioritize other works on the project. We go to the next slide, we'll talk about Corso Italia. So this station, this obviously on the right-hand side is where Ottawa Community Housing has a development that's in the works. On the left, there's development application in place for a tower. So it'll be a very busy community. You see the platform doesn't look finished, but they've got a lot of protective measures on the actual platform itself to prevent it from being damaged. The glass is largely up. If you go to the next slide, you see a bit of a you see a bit of a side shot. So the glass is largely in. There's some finishing works on the roof lines. Down on the platform level, they are staging some of the glass, but you see the transit shelters are in, the light stands are in. It's in pretty good shape in terms of the station. Next station is Dow's Lake in terms of progress. And so in the middle where it's wrapped, so that's where they're working on the elevator banks. And so a big change in stage 2 is to go to new elevators, redundant elevators. So if there's one out of service, there'll always be one available for people who need it. And then the right-hand side, they are sandblasting the original stairs and doing a lot of work on that. And that's why you see it covered up. And so it still looks very busy, but they are getting a lot closer to being finished at that station. Next slide just shows down at the platform view. So you see the platform edge there on the left, the platform covered in plywood just to protect it from any construction damage. The tracks are in place. So those on the left, those actually lift up to allow a freight train to go through as part of the federal regulations. You see the glass there on the right, the bird-friendly glass for the elevator banks. In terms of guideway progress on the next slide, it is coming on well. We have one little gap on the network right now at Hunt Club Road. Otherwise, the tracks are in everywhere. They're doing some touch-ups everywhere. That piece of equipment you see there is basically like a person lift to get that runs on the tracks that allows them to do work on the cabling and such in the tunnel. So on the next slide, you see the tunnel. the new top corners, you kind of see the new jet fans that we've installed for the tunnel ventilation system, the cabling along the side to provide radio coverage for emergency radios for emergency responders, as well as the coverage for cellular phone calls as well. So a lot of progress there. Carlton Station on the next one. The platform is in very good shape. You see they've taken off the plywoods there. It's basically finished. You see all the light stands are in place. Those have the mounts for the cameras as well as the platform information displays. So they do need to reinstate the public art at this location. On the right-hand side, there was if you recall, there was a red piece of art. I forget the name of it, so they do need to reinstate that. But they're basically commissioning the cameras and the communication systems here at the station. The next one shows Rita River Bridge. So on the left, the piers have been rebuilt and rehabilitated. On the right, they're planning to mobilize to finish this bridge, the bridge on the right, over the coming weeks, probably mid to late June, you'll see a lot of activity there, but still end of summer in terms of actually opening it up to the public. And so I know there's a lot of interest in getting this open. But the work that's remaining is basically concrete, civil works, paving works, which is the same work that we need to do at the park and rides. And so we still prioritize the park and rides over this activity. The next slide shows Mooney's Bay. So Mooney's Bay, again, very good shape. You see it's basically finished. You see a tent there on the upper right where they're doing some fiber testing, but otherwise the platform's finished. All the light standards are in there. Everything's going well. The next two slides show Elwood Diamond. So just Elwood Diamond from one view, and then the next one from the side view. So this is going over the via tracks. You go to the next one, Eric. Yeah. So you see the via tracks underneath, and then we're going up and over the via tracks through this area. A couple of photos of the Albion Yard and the next step. Oh, so sorry, Walkley Station. I got out of order here. Walkley Station. So one view, and then the second view. You do see on the left on this page or the right-hand side, there's been lots of questions about the multi-use pathway that connects to the development. So that's just been paved recently. And then the middle right, we're looking just to finish the final connection into the development. But at that point, the multi-use pathway would be restored to be able to get from basically the general area of that development, Bank Street, up to the entrance of the station. The station platform down below is in great shape. It's essentially finished. So this is probably one of our most advanced stations. Go to the next one, we'll see some shots of Albion Yard. So we continue to do some works on Albion Yard. If you go to the next shot, we'll show an inside view of the jacking equipment to be able to work on the trains. And so the jacking equipment's in place. On the next slide. There you go. So there's the lifts to be able to work underneath if you need to do a bogie replacement. So that's a big series of lifts for the vehicle. The next one shows the wheel lathe. So in the previous incarnation of the Trillium line, we didn't have a wheel lathe. So if we had a wheel flat, we'd have to send the wheels out for service. So that was a bit of effort that we had to do previously. So now that we have the wheel lathe, we're in good shape. So the next slide should show the wheel lathe. There it is. So if we have any problems with wheel flats, we didn't have many problems with wheel flats in the old system, so I'm not expecting a lot of issues, but we have the wheel lathe in case there's an issue. You go to the next slide, Greenboro Station shows the basically finished as well, moving on to the landscaping at this location, which is a very good sign. That pretty good indicator that they're wrapping things up. South Key Station, still a lot of activity here, some finishing on the roof line. Platform's in good shape. All the glass is generally in place. They're doing some work on commissioning the systems now. Leitrim Station on the next slide, just to give you a sense. So they are finishing that roof line, but if you look down on the bottom, all the glazing is in place. The next big activity in this area is to start the work on the park and ride and the bus loop around the bus operator building. Just a look at the platform of Leitrim and you'll get a good sense of the completion. So the fence that's there is just really just a construction safety fence. There you see the platform edge devices are flipped up. And so that's actually to allow a freight vehicle to go through if it needs to. And so those are on all the stations on the line. If you go to the next slide, we'll see Bowesville Station. So pretty good progress here. Again, the next big activity, finishing up a little bit of that, closing in that yellow you see on the roof line, the green on the sides, and then working on the park and ride that's in the distance in the photo. Limebank Station is the next. So here again, you see them finishing up where you see the white tarps. That's really where the elevators are still being commissioned and putting in the final glass there. But we visited the station the other week, and there's a beehive of activity, and there's a lot of progress here. Again, the next big activity in this location is to get the roads and the bus loop finished. Upland Station, so next to the Ernst & Young. Oh, there's the photo of the train at the station, which is very exciting. There's also a short video of that we'll show after. Upland Station. So next to the Ernst & Young Center. So it's in decent shape as well, a little bit lagging behind in terms of the roof work and finishing that up, but that should go quickly now that the weather's turned. The next slide, just in general, the signal progress is going well. So they are planning on commissioning all the signal systems over June and July. And so by the end of the July, we'll have a good sense of where we are with the signal systems and the signal testing. Then the next slide, Airport Station, which is basically the only thing that's missing from Airport Station is a fiber connection back to our control center in order to enable the fire system. But otherwise, that station's largely complete. They're working on the signals at that location. So you see in the middle, there's a little signal tower, but the first train was out there the other week. So good progress all around there. So that's the construction eye candy. So I'll go through some of the details on the actual report that we provided. So the next slide, we'll jump right in. Talk a little bit about kind of remaining works on the next slide on the bottom. And then, so remaining works, the track installation. So that's that little chunk of track that's required at Hunt Club, Stadler vehicle testing, signal testing, station completion is really where we are. And then trial running substantial completion. In terms of the mobility impacts, we don't need to spend too much time on this because a lot of the mobility connections have been restored. Obviously the big one, a couple of big ones that I know the community is excited about. Hunt Club Road, we are going to put a pedestrian bridge. It's built, it's there in place, but we need to connect the multi-use pathways to get pedestrians to the bridge, and then they'll be able to get across Hunt Club, and then Rideau River pedestrian bridge. So pretty good shape there. So the mobility detours and impacts are reduced significantly now as compared to a year ago. So you just, the next slide talks a little bit about the impacts on a couple of different locations where we just need to be on the lookout. They are still doing lots of heavy activity, and so there are kind of moving closures a little bit for some of this work. The next one talks more on the next slide. We talk a little bit about the road work. And obviously the big one in the south is realigning that one Bowesville Earl Armstrong intersection. That's a big change in the south. Next slide shows just the general project schedule. So this is basically the same as what we showed you last time we came. So still aiming for start a trial running near the end of September, barring any issues with some of the project risks. And so I'll walk you through some of those project risks now. This is some of the information that was included in the report. So on the next slide, I would say generally on a big project like this, the number one thing is to make sure that we don't have a safety incident during construction. If we have an issue with a train or a worker or anything, that could, potentially cause human harm, which is like unthinkable, but would also have an impact on the schedule. So doing everything we can to avoid any incidents during construction, during testing, commissioning. And then the second part of that is really if we find a safety issue during the testing program, like we go to run the trains, we go to run the system, and we find some odd behavior or something that from a safety point of view, we hadn't picked up during design, that's not covered. If we needed time to rectify that, that could create additional time and pressure on the project. So that's the kind of the first point that we're tracking: safety during construction and safety of the design. The second thing, in terms of project risk that we're tracking is really the system performance testing. We've talked about 12-minute headway. We've talked about turnaround time a little bit already. We need the system to work and to work reliably. If we have any issues with the trains that comes up over the summer or over the testing program, that could be a challenge for us and could require time to correct those things. If it's a big software change affecting, for example, the signal system, which is safety critical, that would require time. So that's something that we're watching and monitoring to make sure that we don't have any issues. And then on this slide, the last item is just the readiness of the system for training. We want to give the training department a relatively mature system. We know that it won't be perfect. It can't be 100%, but we want to give it to them in an advanced state such that they're not having to retrain. One of the things, if we find bugs during performance testing that causes us to change standard operating procedures, that will cause us to have to retrain staff. Ideally, we're trying to train them once on the final solution. If there's issues that arise, and we expect there will be some, it's okay to do a minimal amount of retraining, but we don't want to spend all our time retraining people. We want to get through the training in an efficient manner on a base design, a base solution that doesn't change throughout the testing program. If you go to the next, slide. So there was a new regulation that came out over the course of the project in relation to a locomotive video and voice recorder. So that's a device that's in the cab that's looking at the operator, monitoring their activities and recording any sounds in the cab. So that's a new federal regulation. Those units have been purchased, but the supplier has indicated a delay with those units to September. And so we're tracking that closely. We have a follow-up with them in June. But that right now, that is a potential risk to the project. And there are other regulatory risks that we see arising. One of the items, for example, we've been asked to put a wayside detection unit on the system. Not that we've ever had a problem or an issue with journal bearings or vehicles that required a wayside detector in the past, but I think partly stemming from some of the things that we saw in stage one, Transport Canada has asked us to put that in, and so we're tracking that. So there are things like that that are coming up from the regular point of view that present some risk to the overall schedule. The next one on the slide there is just the remaining works. When you look at some of the stations look very advanced, some of them are a little bit further behind. The park and rides, they need to make good progress on those park and rides over the summer. There are some elements of the park and rides that we've said they could probably take a little bit of extra time with. We're still kind of negotiating that. There are some secondary roads that aren't required at the outset of the revenue service, and so we may work with them to see if some of that can be deferred in order to make sure the overall project opens in a timely fashion. So, and then it just as you continue civil works, if we find anything in the ground that we didn't expect, that will be a challenge as well. And then the last one is there is a lot of activity. I pointed out the Ottawa Community Housing Project and the adjacent development at Corso Italia, but the Ottawa Hospital's parking garage overbuild over the line is an impact. They're going to need access. We've been working with them over the last year and a half. At one point, there was a discussion about fully enclosing the line, which would trigger the requirement for tunnel ventilation systems. We've been able to get past that so that they've updated the design so it's not fully enclosing the guideway, but they're still going to have time and a requirement to get close to the guideway, potentially do blasting, put in piers, put in elements over the guideway. And when they're doing stuff over the guideway, we can't be running trains. And so if that happens this year during test commissioning, if we can't find time, potentially it would happen during revenue service. But that is a real, when we talk a lot, I would say in the community about overbuilds, but the overbuilds have an impact. It's not Carlton parking garage is kind of the example everybody uses, but it does take time and space to put in, structures over light rail systems, and that usually means a closure for them for whatever amount of time they need to do that. So there's a real impact there potentially. We've worked with them to optimize their design to minimize the impact. We're continuing to work with them, but it's important to flag to the group that, if we come back and say we need a weekend closure for them to put in girders, that will be the reason why. So those are the last LRT subcommittee. Those are kind of the request to look at the overall program risks. So those are kind of the big ones, the high level ones that we're tracking. Obviously, there's a lot of little ones. Now I'll get into a little bit about the testing commissioning program and what's left to go. So if you go to the next slide, we are following a standard testing commissioning process where we're, you can jump ahead to the next one as well. Going through vehicle dynamic testing, vehicle final acceptance. The signaling system is the big commissioning effort that's required. The tunnel ventilation system needs to be brought online. So we test those as much as we can in the factory. Then we bring them to the field, test them in situ in the field, and then we test the connections and the connectivity back to the control center in order to make sure it's fully integrated. And then that ends with the system-wide performance testing. So it's really just running the trains, 12-minute headway, the 9 trains in service, 2 on the Airport Link and 7 on the main line, making sure that we can meet the performance criteria, making sure that they're reliable, that we have no issues, all the switch machines are reliable. So the proof is in the pudding. So we need to run that system August and September to really know that we're ready for trial running. I spoke about it earlier a little bit, the head end. So if you go to the next slide, this is just a quick snapshot of the temporary test lab that city staff have built in one of our facilities, where we've set up all the servers on the desks. You see the various servers for the different devices on the wall. They've actually, against the plywood, they've actually mounted up a speaker, a camera. There's a platform information display on the floor. So they've literally built a little mock transit operations control center in the room to validate that everything's working. And then obviously, once that's done and complete, they'll move that equipment into the control center, into its final place. And then the operators, the controllers will start using it from there. If you go to the next slide, so we're going to talk just a little bit about trial running. Just so there's 4 slides here just to get through and provide as much clarity and give you an opportunity to ask questions about the trial running process. Obviously, the primary intent is to demonstrate that the system is working end to end. All the processes are in place. The maintenance staff know how to maintain the system. The operations staff know how to operate and control the system. So those are kind of the big objectives. In stage 1, there's obviously lots of challenges here. If we go to the next slide, we talk about the specific criteria that we've embedded into the contract. So this is the 98.5% availability that they need to demonstrate over a 14-day period. So a rolling average of 98.5. So that's basically the criteria that's embedded that they need to demonstrate, combined with there's a criteria that they need to have their maintenance processes in place to avoid issues with some of the wayside infrastructure. So infrastructure that doesn't affect running the trains, like a camera, like an ETEL, they need to have the right processes in place to keep those things working correctly as well. So that's kind of the primary criteria that we're using for trial running. And then we have, as a result of the public inquiry, we have asked the system integration verifier, Ricardo Rail, to provide an independent view on trial running results, any changes, modifications to running times or different things that they would be there to provide an independent view, and that they would be part of the reporting back out to council on the trial running results. So obviously, Renee's talked about it previously. We're committing to it again here, is just providing the daily reports to council during the trial running period, followed by a technical briefing at the end of the trial running period to give you, day-by-day results, rolling average outcomes from the dress rehearsal, or it's not the dress rehearsals, but the procedures, the testing, the different scenarios that we do prior to going into service. Separately, so on the next slide, there, 98.5 is a roll-up of a lot of other things. It's simple to kind of say 98.5, but it requires a lot of things to take place correctly. For example, the vehicles need to go out on time in the morning. They need to be cleaned, clean and ready to go. They need to come back at the end of the night. They need to be refueled. Sand has to be added. They have to be rewashed, interior, exterior. They need to be ready to go and staged to be launched on time the next morning. So all of those things, it can be great to run perfect score first day, but all those vehicles need to come back into the yard, be set up for the next day. And so there'll be a team of people on our side that are monitoring all those inputs. It's not a specific measure in the output, but if those inputs aren't done correctly, then you'll never hit the 98.5. If they can't fuel those vehicles overnight in a timely fashion, we won't hit the 98.5. And so there'll be a team that's monitoring all of those inputs, looking for those safety incidents, looking for anything that's a no-go to our customers. Like if we lose a set of elevator banks at a station, that's just not a scenario that would be acceptable to us. So this is kind of a snapshot of that list. And then on the next slide, again, early days, but we're still kind of putting together a draft of what you would see on the daily scorecard that would come to council. I blurred it on purpose, but I provided the 3 columns are total number of planned runs, so the number of end-to-end runs that are done for the day, the total number that are completed on-time departure, so within 30 seconds. They need to leave within 30 seconds of their scheduled time, otherwise they don't count. And then if they all leave on time, that's 100%. If there's a percentage that are late, then that obviously affects the number. And so that happy to provide, if there's details that you want as part of the daily update, happy to have those discussions. There's lots of time for us to have that dialogue. This is an early draft. We may circulate another version just to give you an opportunity to provide some feedback. 98.5 is the big one. The work orders is a second. And then, we assume that you would want to, have any additional kind of commentary or color around how the day went. And so we can talk about what that would look like as well. We're happy to provide any feedback or any information that you want in the following day about how the day's performance went, just to give you an update, give you a clear understanding what's taken place and what's not taken place. So that's trial running, and I'm happy to take questions at the end about that. The next slide will go into provide a little bit of color on the training requirements. So there's a lot of activities on the OC Transpo side, within rail operations, within bus operations, within bus planning, service planning, that are ongoing to make, to be able to turn on the system once we go into service. And the first thing on the next slide is the training requirements. And so training staff, training the controllers in the control room. So this is a new function that we're doing at the city. Previously, we used to outsource this function. We're bringing that in-house. So the controllers who are going to dispatch the trains, the operators on the trains themselves, the train control system on the Trillium line is different than the Confederation line. We have speed control. We have governance about stopping distances. We have a lot of controls in place, but at the end of the day, the operator is still controlling the speed of the train. And so they're governed. There's a top limit in terms of speed they can go. There's also enforcement of locations they can go, but they do get to control the acceleration, the braking, the general passing speeds. So it's a slightly different style of operating the vehicle. And so we've tried to accommodate that through the training program. So that's internal staff for dispatch and operations. On the next slide, we also spent a lot of time with the emergency responders. Here you see this is an exercise working on the train on how to re-rail it. And so if there's an incident where the train comes off the tracks and you need to put it back onto the tracks, or if there's an incident where something gets trapped under the train, you need to lift the train. So there's a set of re-railing equipment and lifting equipment that can be deployed in the field. So obviously working with the emergency responders on that, going through a series of tabletop exercises with them to understand, the look and feel of the new vehicles, the look and feel of the stations. There is an app that was built in stage 1 that's being expanded in stage 2 that the emergency responders could use for understanding the system and how it works. But also the access points along the guideway. If a train gets stuck, if you need to do an evacuation, what's the nearest point you can get to? Because there are some remote locations on the Trillium line, but there are a number of access points all along the line where they would be able to get to. So on the next slide, we have been doing some integrated tabletop exercises between operations, emergency responders, and others. And then there will be a full-scale exercise with the emergency responders and the airport authority prior to going into service. So that's currently being planned for September. So a final check that everyone's trained and understand what the protocols are. So that's the training. And then the other big activity that leads to safety certification shown on the next slide is just this application of the CENELEC standard, and then having the independent oversight, the independent safety auditor working on behalf of the city to validate that everything that Transit Next is doing is correct. So Transit Next has brought a very strong safety assurance team to the table. They came over from the UK a few years ago. They've been working very hard. They also engaged one of their subsidiaries, Atkins Global, to provide an independent review. So this is internal to them, but independent of the design team of the safety design and the processes. And then separately, the city has our own safety overview and oversight process through Center, as well as our design teams. So a lot of activity in this area. If you go to the next slide, yeah, okay, it worked. This slide really, so what happens is, I kind of talked about those things in very abstract ways, but at the end of the day, what we're looking for is a safety certificate for the system. We're looking for, the design process, the construction process, the commissioning process, all to be signed off, resulting in an engineering safety case. That's really what we use to say the design and the system's been built. Once we have that in hand, that's when we can start letting passengers on from a design point of view. But that's not the final step. We're going to use that confirms to us that the design is complete, but then we need to take that to Transport Canada, which is the next slide, and show to them that we've done all the right steps in terms of getting the system ready. Critically, there's two documents that we need: certificate of fitness from the Canadian Transportation Agency, which is related to insurance and other matters, but a railway operating certificate from Transport Canada. That's the final check that we need in order to have approval essentially to put the system into service. Absent that railway operating certificate, we could not open the system to passengers. So we go to the next slide. It shows kind of a summary of high-level summary of some of the submissions that are required to be made. We have been working with Transport Canada on this issue for the last 6 years. There's a couple, I would say, critical ones in there. One is the demonstration that the vehicle is fit for purpose through compliance with APTA standards and other standards. And then there's a new rule book that's used to accommodate the new signal system. So these are big change. The big changes on the network are adding the new vehicles, the Stadler vehicles, as well as updating the rule book to reflect the signal system. So this is going to be one of the first federally regulated systems that uses an advanced train control system. So that will be a first, and we've been bringing Transport Canada along the ride with us for this ride, putting the system into service, and they've been there reviewing and approving these documents. And so that's a big piece of the puzzle in terms of getting into service. So we go to the next slide. So just to kind of step through, this is just kind of what I mentioned, the various submissions that are made. Operations needs to provide a safety management system. There's a final notice of change in operations. We need the certificate of fitness, and then there's the railway operating certificate. And we understand that this is all well in hand, and we should be in good stead to get this when we request it. And then once we have the railway operating certificate, then we turn our minds to public launch, which is on the next slide. In the background, to all of the work that my team's been doing on the construction side, the city has a rail activation management plan and a rail operational readiness program, which is a series of individual programs that all have a project lead or all used to track and monitor additional activities that transit needs to do to get ready. It's one thing to put the system into service, it's another to update the journey planner. It's another to test that all the bus loops work correctly. It's another to make sure that the fare gates all are linked back to the head-end system. So on the next slide, you see an overview of the different projects that are underway. Each of these projects has a project lead and a project schedule, a program charter to make sure their piece of the puzzle is ready to go, so that as an integrated transit system, it's ready to open to the public, and all the systems work as expected, so that when you go to the journey planner, it brings up line 2, line 4 as options for you on your route that day. When you get on the bus network, the bus loop has already been tested and it's ready to go. The bus operator buildings are connected through the IT systems. So I know Renee talked about bringing back this group to provide you a little bit more detail on this particular slide, but this is the group and the various groups that are working behind the scenes to make sure that the transit system is ready to go for service. So that is the end of my portion of the presentation. I will now hand it over to Pat Scrimger, who will talk to you a little bit about the bus system and the bus transition.
Thanks, Michael. We'll go to the next slide, please. When the O-Train lines 2 and 4 open, we'll be revising bus services in the Leitrim area, Findlay Creek, and all across Riverside South to connect with the trains at the new stations in those areas. And over the next few slides, I'll take you through the interim bus changes that we'll make at the time the train opens, the parallel bus service that will run through the winter, just in case there's anything that goes wrong, and then where we are on planning bus route changes, which could come into effect after the winter in the spring of 2024. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So just an overview that when the line opens, whenever that is in the fall, if it's in the fall, we hope, the bus routes will be changed to make those connections at many connections at Linebank Station. We'll extend Route 74, which now ends on the west side of the river, to Linebank Station. We'll change routes 99, 198, 278, 299 to make connections at Linebank, serving all the current customers. Routes 93, 99, 299 already serve Leitrim Station and will continue to do so. Route 97 will continue to serve the airport. Route 197 will have a new connection at Upland Station. And north of that point, north of Hunt Club, all of the bus routes will remain as they are now, providing the same connections they do today. The next slide, please. So that will result, and I'll show you a map on the next slide or two. So we can run the current bus service will continue to run through the winter. So we've got the assurance of the backup of having both the train and the bus service over that first winter of operation. And we'll do that by continuing to run the current Line 2 replacement buses that have been running since 2020 between Bayview and South Keys. We'll continue to run Route 99 and Route 97 over their current pattern, and then we'll have the ability to remove those backup services and direct all customers to the train service in the spring of 24. Let's go to the next, which I think will be the map. So on the left, we've got a very simple drawing of the current major bus routes in the area. And on the right, an illustration of what those bus routes, how they would be changed and how they would back up the train. So if we look at the map on the left, from the left to the right, we see Route 74 running from Tunney's Pasture through Baseline down to Nepean Wood Station, which is Fallowfield and Woodruff. Next to the right, you see the Line 2 buses, which have been running through the construction period from Bayview to South Keys, serving all the O train stations. Then Route 97, which runs from Herdman Station through South Keys to the airport. And then Route 99, which runs from South Keys with rush hour trips to Herdman, South Keys through Leitrim Station, through Riverside South, Riverview Station, Nepean Wood Station, and on west into Barrhaven. When you look at the map on the right, you'll see those same bus routes, plus the train, plus some extensions on two of those major bus routes. So again, going left to right, Route 74 running from Tunney's Pasture to Nepean Woods, but then extended across the Vimy Memorial Bridge to Riverview Station and making the train connection at Limebank Station. Then you see, we'll come back to 99. You see, well, let's talk about 99 while we're down at the bottom left of the map. Route 99 coming east from Barrhaven through Nepean Wood Station, through Riverview Station, as it does now, through the residential part of Riverside South on Spratt. And then when it gets to Spratt and Limebank, going south on Limebank to make a connection at Limebank Station, looping through there and then continuing back up north on Limebank to Leitrim Road to serve Leitrim Station, South Keys Station, and during rush hours go to Herdman Station. Then if we go back to left to right, you see the new O train Line 2 in green from Bayview Station, serving all the stations through South Keys, through Leitrim, and terminating at Limebank. And then next from left to right, you see the buses on the buses on the Line 2 replacement running from Bayview to South Keys, which would continue. And then Route 97 continuing to run from Herdman through South Keys to the airport, where it would be backing up the new blue Line 4 of the O train system. And then Route 99, which we talked about earlier, running from Herdman down to South Keys, Leitrim, Limebank, through Riverside South, and across into Barrhaven. So that second map sort of shows the overlay of the train, the small extensions to Route 74 and 99, and the existing bus route network providing. So you can see everywhere there's duplicate buses and trains. Then we'll go to the next slide, please. And we'll take an early look of what the system could look like in the spring of 2024. We're working on this through the current bus route review process with a lot of consultation with, we've met with all councillors. We're going through consultation with a lot of opportunity for customers to comment, and we'll be working on that this summer, coming back to councillors in the areas affected later in the year. And so this is an example of what the bus route network could look like in the spring of 2024, with Route 74 then running from Tunney's Pasture through Nepean Woods. Just wait for that to come back. Riverview and terminating at Limebank, where customers could change to the train if that's where they're going. Route 99 coming from Barrhaven across the river, stopping at Nepean Wood Station on the west side, stopping at Riverview Station, going through the residential part of Riverside South, and ending at Limebank Station. And then removing at that point, because it's no longer needed, the parallel part of Route 99 between Limebank Station and Herdman Station, removing the parallel part of Route 97 between the airport and South Keys Station, removing the current replacement bus service between South Keys and Bayview, and directing all of those customers to the faster and more reliable service on the train. And then at that point, it would be Route 98 that becomes the primary service on the transitway between Greenboro, South Keys, and Herdman. But there's many other routes that run along that transitway as well. This 98's just shown there to remind us that there's still a good transitway connection from South Keys to Herdman. And it's not shown on the map, but you can visualize at the top that line 1, the east-west O train, the electric line, makes that connection with Route 74 at Tiny's Pasture, makes that connection with line 2 at Bayview Station, and makes that connection with Route 98 and the other transitway routes at Herdman Station. We'll go to one more slide, I think. And that is to talk about the rail replacement bus service that we would run in case of a service disruption after the parallel service has been removed. We're all too familiar with the R1 concept of rail replacement service on the east-west line. This is the backup system that would also be there in case of a disruption. So the R2 would be the replacement bus in case of a service disruption on line 2, and the R4 would be in case of a service disruption on line 4 to the airport. During this first winter, 23-24, we won't need to ever put this in place because we'll already have a full backup parallel bus service that's continuing from today. But once we take that opportunity to remove that backup, then we will have this plan, and it will operate, like we're familiar with R1 when it's needed, and it can operate very similar to what we now see on the line 2 replacement bus that's been running for the last 3 years. And of course, that comes with full operating plans, full customer information, and we hope to never see it and never need it. So I think that's the end of my slides. I'll turn you back to Michael for just that last page.
Thank you, Pat. So obviously, this is the list of ways that you can get in touch with us. Our communications team is always available, ready to help with presentations or community consultations. And they have done a fabulous job of putting together a couple of little videos. It wouldn't be a subcommittee without a video. So Eric, if you could just show the line bank video first. So there is 2 short videos, well, one very short and one medium. So there's a line bank video, and then there's a 3-minute video of the alignment. Do you have those? Perfect. Yes. There's just one more little short one. I think it's like 30 seconds showing the first train to Line Bank Station, which was a big milestone for the project team. So they're very excited for that. So we'll play that last one and then hand it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anything else from staff? Okay, thanks for all that. And thank you, Michael, for going through that. Lots of information. I know there'll be questions. Because we're a bare minimum quorum, I had said we'd consider a break, just a short break. So we're going to do that right now, just 5 or 6 minute break. We'll recess and then we'll come back to questions. Thank you. Alors, juste une pause de 5 à 6 minutes et on revient avec les questions. Merci.
A 5 or 6 minute break and we'll come back with questions.
there was a slide with the 6 risks. One of them was the remaining works. And I just want to make sure I understand, because there's a line in there that said quantity of remaining works may be unachievable. Is that strictly what you've listed, for example, the pedestrian bridge or the park and rides, or is there more remaining works that I guess I'm looking for more context around that line in the presentation.
I think it's more just about the contractor being able to provide the requisite resources to complete that works, that like there's not other deferred works or other remaining works that are kind of coming afterwards. There's a lot of work left. If you look at the park and rides, you look at some of the, Rita River Pedestrian Bridge, Hunt Club Bridge, there's a volume of work. And if they were to have if there was a strike or some other kind of impact on resources, then the volume of work remaining would exceed their available resources.
But I guess, is it work that's critical to the opening of the system, or is it work like you've identified in the park and rides that, doesn't have to be there right on day one? It could be mostly complete or could be finished in the weeks after.
Well, we're actively having those discussions with them to make sure that we're prioritizing the work that's required for the system to function, so that we can open up the train system effectively, and to see what could be deferred or what needs to be deferred. Ideally nothing gets deferred, but it's going to require some attention over the coming months.
Okay. The note you had about regulatory approvals, emerging requirements, is that typical? Is that a typical risk or a typical challenge that you have to deal with leading up to the launch, or is that unusual to have regulatory changes like that?
Mr. Chair, I think it's influenced in a large part by performance on stage one. Okay. I think that generally the requirements haven't changed, don't change that often, that it's fairly static. I would say this one challenge with this voice recorder and the delay in manufacturing is kind of like that's something that's been in the works for a number of years, but some of the recent changes, say in the last 9 months, are new, and we'll pivot and we'll try to respond quickly to them, and we want to keep the regulator satisfied that we're doing the right things. But I would say some of them are new, considering we've been in discussion with them for a number of years.
Okay, I may have 1 or 2 questions later, but I just wanted to mention I had the opportunity about 3 weeks ago to attend one of the rail operational readiness meetings with OC Transpo, and they had about 50 employees in the room, all on the OC Transpo side. And there was a slide that was up with probably about 25 squares. Just amazing how much coordination and how many different elements there are to, Renee said it in her opening, it's a choreography. Everything from, yes, the trial running, but also installation of security cameras and wayfinding signs, and, how are we going to schedule the cash delivery to the fare machines right on time for the opening? Like, it's an amazing amount of coordination. And I was really impressed with the, I guess the openness of staff to, I think the purpose of that meeting was to bring all of the groups together and identify where there might be challenges, and making sure that there isn't anything that's been overlooked, and if there are issues, if there are different parts of the project that depend on the others, understanding those links and working through solutions. It was a really, really interesting meeting to be a part of, and I'd say the presentations like this one today, the previous presentation we had, the awareness that I have as a counselor about how the preparation for launch is happening. It's night and day compared to 2019. And really appreciate the updates and the information, and I think the transparency around where there are risks and challenges and how those are being addressed as we go forward. Thanks, Chair.
Councilor Leeper.
Thanks. Thank you very much for the presentation. I do appreciate being kept abreast of how progress is going, and I'm feeling very confident. Ms. Amilcar, you clearly have a great handle on the work that remains to be done. I just have a couple of very parochial questions. The first of which is the Corso Italia, I think, is supposed to have a pedestrian cycling activated signal. Do you know if that will be in place by the time across Gladstone? Will that be open in place by the time the station opens, or is that going to have to be completed later?
I'll have to follow up on that specific one. The intent is things like that affect access to the station are done, but I'll have to double check on that specific request.
Yeah, I'd be interested in the rough timing on that. People using the Trillium Path, it's obviously our key north-south cycling route, and they've been very patient. And the other one is the Ped Bridge to Nowhere, going across at Bayview Station. I'm just curious, do we have securities from Trinity to ensure that if that project doesn't move ahead in some kind of timely fashion, that we're able to connect that bridge to something useful?
This is a question for our partners in
In
real estate,
planning.
but there is an agreement in place that's enforceable in terms of recouping our costs at the very least.
Okay, I'll chat with Pred and find out where that is, because I'm seeing that bridge potentially just sort of hanging out there for, you know, literally years to come. So I'll follow up. One other question. The wheel lathe that you now have for line 2 and 4, can it be used for wheels on line 1 as well? Or are they
theoretically, you could reprogram it to use it for other fleets. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks. That's all, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Curry.
Thank you. So just in terms of what Councillor Gower was saying, we had a fun event the other day at OC Transpo where a 107-year-old resident of Canada North wanted to cross off her bucket list the ability to drive a train. She always wanted to drive one. She grew up beside a train track and wanted to be the conductor. So OC Transpo came up with a very creative idea that she would come and drive the simulator. So, and she did. And it was very fun, very exciting. She loved it. And while she was doing the diesel simulator, I did the other one at the other end, the automatic one. And it was amazing to think about how many different scenarios could be given to someone trying to operate the train at the same time they're trying to operate a train. And I really felt that there was a really thorough training program. I went through just some of it and I didn't, cause any problems or hit anything or do anything wrong really, but the possibility and the extensive training was impressive. But I really just wanted to publicly also thank you all for doing that for Mrs. Juanita Snellgrove, who had a wonderful day. I do have some questions and I really just want to look at this motion, Mr. Chair. So there's 3 parts of the motion that we will look at right now, right? That the Light Rail Subcommittee recommend that Council approve the reporting process. The second part is direct the Transit Services Department to provide daily reports to Council. And the third part, direct the Transit Services Department to provide a technical briefing once the trial running is complete. So that's what we're approving. And so it sounds great to me. I just wanted to ask Mr. Morgan about that page that you sort of said, this is a draft. When I looked at the categories and you said you'd like feedback, I don't know what I don't know. Is there anything else? You just put up a couple of ideas there, but is there anything else you think that we would absolutely need to have to be able to see? 98.5 is a good target, but any other information that we would want to know that maybe didn't happen in 2019?
Thank you for the question. I think that if there's anything reliability related, I think it would be interesting to service that, so if there's any, sometimes you can run a train service at 98.5, but you might still have there might still be some other issue that people are chasing down or tracking kind of behind the scenes. And so I think if there's any reliability issues that don't manifest themselves as service problems, it would be interesting for you to know that. And then, probably the other big thing is just the maintenance performance on the overnight, to make sure that that's being done correctly and the trains are being cleaned and washed and refueled in a timely manner. I think those are the kind of the big things in terms of understanding what's going on behind the scenes that, while it gets wrapped up in the 98.5, we hadn't thought to report on that explicitly.
Okay, and that you had there a 14-day outline, right? So that would be after 14 days, we would get what the results were. But when in this motion, it talks about a daily report. What would we get daily?
So on a daily basis, what we propose to provide is a summary of yesterday's performance, like measure of the 98.5, whether the 98.5 was achieved or not, what the number was, and are there any work order issues that came up? Are there any other notable things that came up that we'd like to report just out of transparency purposes?
Okay, so Mr. Chair, I think what would be helpful for you to tell council, the rest of council, sort of what this is going to look like, if it's going to come to everybody, because we're here on this committee, we hear it, but council should know what's maybe coming at them. The other is, will that come in an email? I mean, the daily briefing, the technical briefing will obviously be one for the public and media, but the daily updates, will they come through email every day to us?
Yeah, either email or as an attachment as a memo, but daily on email, yes.
Okay. Okay, well, I think those are, I mean, I'm listening to Councillor Gower here say that this is very, very different from what you received in 2019. And, you know, I think that's good, you know, as an overarching comment. I can't think of anything else. I don't know if some of my comments here on this motion has forced anyone else to think of anything, but I'm pleased to see these three segments of this motion, and I would vote for it.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Councillor, and thanks for bringing us back to the recommendations, which I think, you know, normally they come from staff, but I think this comes from this council, right? And this comes from the Commission of Inquiry. This comes from the public telling us, you know, we really want you to pay attention to the testing and be transparent. And, you know, there's a lot of interest in Councillor. So I think, you know, these recommendations are, you know, they're very powerful, and that I think they came from a lot of work that we're doing, and we're showing to the public that we are listening and we heard their concerns. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. Yes, so Steve and I were chatting, or Chair DeRoche and I were chatting during the presentation. One thing that I'm really interested in where those daily briefings is, if we don't achieve 98.5, why not? Color and commentary with respect to what those factors were. It sounds, based on your comments, that you are open to providing that. So happy to chat more about that if you're interested. And I just thought it would be worthwhile to mention that on June 3rd, I believe, as part of Doors Open, that residents are invited to visit Greenboro Station from 11 to 3, when they can do a walkthrough of the station. And there will also be a Stadler Flirt vehicle that residents can take a look at as well. Will people be able to walk on the vehicle and take a look at the inside of that?
That's the plan.
Amazing. So I hope residents will take advantage of seeing a station that's at a fairly advanced state of completion, and the rail vehicle for Doors Open on June 3rd at Greenboro. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Some questions from my part. And we've talked about it before, that the testing period, the handover testing period is 21 days. But at the end of the day, it's 21 days. That's the plan. But we need results, right? And so it could be longer. It could be, you know, we're going to be seeing sort of the day-to-day results. So when people hear 21, that's the plan, as you just said. But it could take some longer until we establish that high confidence level. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair.
Great, thank you. And again, I think we need to, you know, a lot of the things we're doing on this project is repeat. And that's one of those areas. I'm really interested in the federal regulatory context that we're in. And I suppose you could write a book, you could write an MA thesis, you know, whether the nation's capital, you know, it's a benefit to be under the federal jurisdiction on so many projects and the huge federal presence here. And I raise it because I see that there was some regulatory changes that came forward that surely are going to add a cost to this project. You know, their safety, and it's a safety objective and its orientation. But I sometimes think, are we part of regulatory decisions that are really sort of being driven by via rail that travels, you know, thousands of kilometers every day, or you know, the CN lines that, you know, are much different. You know, I'd love to see the comparison in terms of what GO train is required. They provide an excellent service in the GT area. And then, you know, I think the public would accept that, you know, under the provincial regime that is being driven by, let's face it, probably the GTA and their massive rail, commuter rail system. Does this stand out that it's regulatory change that, say, GO train is not required to do?
Chair, if you don't mind, I have Paul on the line. Maybe you can comment
Okay.
your question.
Paul, c'est le safety director. Paul?
Paul,
Yes,
Chief says-
hello.
Say
Yes,
so.
can you
Okay.
hear me, Chair?
Nelsie, yeah.
Okay, just a moment.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we're definitely a very unique situation in terms of the application of the federal railway safety regulations. By and large, I mean, I don't want to speak for Transport Canada here in a public forum, but it's my understanding that by and large, federal regulatory safety for railway has largely been focused on Class 1 railways that are hauling freight. Your question about the GO Train Metrolinx as a operating railway carrying passengers, they're actually regulated under the province of Ontario. So yeah, there is a fundamental difference here in the application of regulations as it relates to passenger rail service here. So it's a bit of a and to make matters maybe even a little bit more complex, Line 1, as you know, is under a self-regulatory model by virtue of a delegation agreement that was signed between the city and Transport Canada in 2011. So in terms of safety and regulatory administration, we have two passenger rail systems in this city that are under really essentially two different regulatory models.
No, thanks for that. And again, I think you could write a thesis on this and compare the pros and cons being in that environment. But sometimes it's helpful when we're talking to the public and saying, why are things more expensive? Why did we have to do some scheduling changes that other jurisdictions aren't going through? It does put considerable weight on us as again, a relatively small municipality. When you compare it to North American systems. And anyway, again, that's a conversation that can go on and on and on. So I won't do that today. Mr. Scrimgeour, thank you for the overview and nice to see this coming together. I guess one of my concerns is like we're adding new stations, right? That this is for the first time we will have rapid transit system past the Greenbelt into the southeast part of our city, into Riverside South, into Finley Creek area. And the changes that you're bringing about really are, I hope the emphasis is on enabling those stations, right? And we have stations to the north. They always had stations. They always had a service. And I imagine you're looking at that, with a fresh look with everything that's going on with ridership. But is there considerable tension going into these new stations and again, providing for the first time a new and higher level of service for these communities?
Yes, that's a major part of the bus route review that we're doing right now. Discussion with all of the councillors and discussion with people who come to the public meetings and the several thousand people who provided comments through the online survey. It's, that we've said that this bus route review is focusing on two major changes that are going on or have gone on in Ottawa. One is the changes in travel pattern that have come from COVID-19 and its spin-offs like hybrid work. And the second is the opening of the O-Train extensions, the two extensions to the south, the one extension to the east, the two extensions to the west. The thing about this is the first, because this should happen this fall. So this will be one of the most important outputs coming out of that route review process. And, it follows a process that we've described earlier in other forums where we're talking to people first about what are they looking for in a transit system? What are the values? Then we'll bring back partway through the year. Here's an example of what a transit system could look like based on what you told us earlier in the year. And then we'll come back to the people and to council and say, and here's the bus route network that we recommend that responds to all of the input using all of the data that are available. So that page that showed a possible realignment of routes, that's just a possibility. The consultation, the analysis, the discussion with you and the other councillors affected will be all going on this year.
Okay, thanks. And I think sometimes things get carried away in terms of the criticism to OC Transpo, and this agonizing questions that we have on the ridership and why the ridership's not there. I really think a big part of why the ridership's not there, first of all, it's the hybrid. I think we can accept that, but it's because the O train is offline right now. We have the rapid transit system completely offline, and the service that you put in place, despite your best efforts, cannot compete with it. So once this system comes up online and starts running, I'd like to think we're going to see a pretty good jump in the ridership. And that's because we're going to be able to provide a level of service that we just have not had historically. And again, it's easy to sort of, I don't want to oversell this project, but I think the reason why our ridership numbers are not great is we just don't have the service in place right now that people want.
It's certainly a part of it in that part of the city. The return of O-train service will make a huge improvement, especially at Carleton University.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially there. It will just, those people who were traveling, students, workers, faculties, people who've been traveling to and from Carleton since 2020 have been doing so on buses that take longer to get there and get caught up in traffic. This is, back to how it was meant to be.
Yeah. No, and I think, we heard that when we did the budget this year, that I think a lot of the public delegations were from Carleton, and that's the mail that I get right now from not just the students, but the parents that are frustrated with the experience of their children trying to get to school. I think in terms of what's really interesting, you've taught me this as well about this system coming online, and perhaps speaking to the reticence of some people to use the system because of concerns over reliability, is that this system, the Trillium, has a greater level of flexibility than the current east-west, in the sense that you will still have the Southeast Transitway operating, right? And you saw that on your map. So at the end of the day, if there is difficulty with the system, the Southeast Transitway is still operating, and you will have that ability. So I know in the West End, when we were into R1, it's not as problematic as the East End, which it's just hard to create a parallel system to serve the customer. So it's difficult for them. But in this case, you actually have some options. You've got the Southeast Transway, and because of the Vimy Bridge, we've got the options on the west side as well. So can you just speak to that really, again, the situation's different. We've heard the situation's different for the starting point of this project in terms of the readiness and the testing, but I also think we're at a different starting point, a different situation in terms of, again, the reliability of the system and options for people if we do have some difficulty.
I think the other thing is that this is the reopening of a system which ran extremely reliably for 20 years. Newer, better, and bigger. But it was very rare for there to be a service disruption on Line 2 as it was, Trillium Line as it was, O-Train as it was, running between Bayview and Greenboro. And we're coming back, and we expect out of our supplier and maintainer, we expect the same quality as we had before. But you're right that there's more than one way of making your trip if you're traveling from South Keys or Greenboro to downtown. People will be choosing between, if they're at that point, take a train to Bayview and change to Line 1 to go into downtown, take a bus to Herdman and change to Line 1 to go into downtown. They've been used to having that choice. They had that choice up until 2020 of which way they wanted to go into downtown, and that choice will be back for them again.
Good, thank you for that. I also liked, and I was talking to Councilor Leeper about this on the sidebar, I liked how you introduced the emergency services and the work that you're doing with all the construction work and all the system readiness and the mapping that you're doing. I'm glad you brought a spotlight on that today, and I think it's worth maybe actually coming back, not to this committee, but maybe to the new emergency service committee and going into a greater level of detail in terms of what we're doing. So Councilor Leeper and I were just talking about taking that offline, but I think it's worth doing that because we were having questions. Well, how many people will be trained for this? Where are they located? And if you think of the fire service, they don't have a boat at every station. They're set up to be able to respond in a timely fashion. So I think we might follow up on that it might be worth coming back with some greater level of detail. And I'm glad you put some small focus on there on a lot of moving parts that are underway at this time. I don't have any other comments well, I have a lot of comments. I won't share them right now, but are there any other questions from members? If not, we'll go to the recommendation of this report. Thank you again to staff. That the Light Rail Subcommittee recommend that Council, one, approve the reporting process to Council for the trial running period of the Line 2 and Line 4 extension trailing line and airport link as outlined in this report, and direct that Transit Service Department the Transit Service Department to provide daily reports to Council advising of the outcomes for the previous day's trial running, including on-time performance as outlined in this report. And 3, direct that the Transit Services Department provide a technical briefing once trial running is complete as outlined in this report. Anybody want to speak to this? No? Is that carried? Carried. Great. Thank you. Again, merci à tout le monde. Toujours beaucoup d'informations et toujours beaucoup de travail.
As usual, very informative and a lot of work, preparation work. So thank you all.
None? Any inquiries? No inquiries? Any other business? None? Next meeting is June 19th, 2023. So we'll see you all then. So we'll move adjournment. Adjourn?
Yeah.
Great.